People who know me online usually all know one core thing about me, that being that I love dinosaurs. I don't know how you could possibly not. They're these giant extinct lizards full of mystery. They're the closest things to actual aliens that we have here on Earth. They roamed the land and seas hundreds of millions of years ago, at just an inconceivable amount of time, and then they just vanished, and we still don't know conclusively why. They're just infinitely fascinating, I don't think anyone can disagree. Then comes the Jurassic Park franchise. Surely every single person knows what that is, the original movie is a masterpiece. But you may not know of the 2003 game called Operation Genesis. This was one of my favourite games, because it tasked you with building your very own Jurassic Park. Limitations of the time and hardware meant you weren't handed unbridled creativity on par with games like Planet Coaster or even Roller Coaster Tycoon, but it was enough to have hours of fun, and it cemented itself very quickly as one of my favourite childhood games. It impacted me so much that I spent the rest of my childhood waiting for a sequel, or something that hit on the same note at least. Nothing came, and my interest slowly faded until Jurassic World. The franchise was revitalized by the new venture into the Jurassic Park universe, and then came Jurassic World Evolution. On paper, leading up to launch, it sounded like what I had always wanted when I was a kid after Operation Genesis. Long story short, it launched, and I was disappointed to say the least with what the game was. It was this messy, slow, inconsistent strategy game that just felt tedious to play. Instead of building your own Jurassic World or park, the game was spent looking at menus, waiting for mobile game tier timers to tick down endlessly, tranquilizing dinosaurs that escaped during moments of what felt like unfair sabotage, and again, just a lot of waiting around. This pivot to a management strategy gameplay loop would have been fine if it was mechanically dense enough to warrant the genre, but it wasn't. It just wasn't fun. Jump forward a few years, and now we have Jurassic World Evolution 2. I knew nothing about the game going in, other than it existed, so I was eager to find out exactly what had changed and how Frontier Developments had taken on the feedback from the first game to implement better changes and hopefully make a better game overall. So, does Jurassic World Evolution 2 fare a healthier launch, or is it doomed to extinction? Let's find out. Welcome, once again, to Jurassic Park. Okay, so what is Jurassic World Evolution 2? It's a management strategy business simulation hybrid with tycoon elements sprinkled in there for good measure. That's all pretty much just a long convoluted way of saying you build a zoo, sprinkle in shops and attractions, and then micromanage certain aspects to increase your revenue. For some people, that's enough to get them through the gates. For others, it's a big deterrent that might not sound like your type of game. What makes Jurassic World Evolution 2 different, however, and may make people on the fence more interested in taking this prehistoric plunge, is just that. This is prehistoric, meaning the theme of the game is based around good old-fashioned, scientifically engineered dino clones. That's right, your attractions are spliced with frog DNA, or shark DNA, or whatever other DNA your employees were able to get their hands on, and the result is these enormous teeth-filled walking crocodiles. And if that's not the coolest premise for a tycoon management strategy game, well, I don't know what is. I'll get this out of the way right at the beginning. This is 100% more of Jurassic World Evolution 1. It's far better, in my opinion, with more content and with deeper gameplay elements, but it is still fundamentally made up of that Jurassic World Evolution 1 DNA. So it's not suddenly a dinosaur-based planet zoo, it is entirely its own thing. To clarify a bit, I never disliked Jurassic World Evolution 1 for the genre it was. I disliked it for its implementation, design, and limitations. A strategy game is hardly ever good when it feels shallow, and Jurassic World Evolution felt shallow. This is all to say, this is still Jurassic World Evolution, it's just less shallow and with more content. Alright, so let's get into the meat of this and talk about the gameplay loop, to give you an idea of what the game actually consists of, because it can be confusing for people who aren't familiar with the genre. As park manager, the loop itself is quite simple. You construct staff buildings, ensure they're powered, send out scientists to conduct fossil expeditions or research certain nodes on the research tree, construct your first enclosure, synthesize your first eggs, incubate them until you're ready to release, and then bam, you have your very first dinosaur in the park. This is the first major milestone because it means now you've got guest appeal. The amount of appeal depends entirely on what dinosaur you first choose to place in your park. For example, Struthiomimus isn't going to bring in as many eyes as, say, a Velociraptor pack or even a Parasaurolophus. As a general rule of thumb, carnivores always bring in more eyeballs. Even though you can't even see it very well due to its size, the Compsognathus has double the appeal of the Struthiomimus because it's a carnivore. This is sounding less like a review of Jurassic World Evolution 2 at this point, and more of a review of the Struthiomimus, but the point is, don't choose Struthiomimus, no one wants to see a Struthiomimus. After that, the goal shifts to nickel and diming your guests who have shown up to look at your Struthiomimus for everything they are worth. This is accomplished by placing guest shops. Other facilities like toilets and emergency shelters can be placed as well to increase guest comfort, because a comfortable guest is more likely to spend that money. You then do that over and over again, expanding your park across the map with additional facilities, attractions, and dinosaur enclosures, all while managing your staff, power grid, dinosaur comfort, emergency situations, all of that kind of stuff. Apart from the staff, this is essentially the same as the first game. What separates it is the added depth to all the systems, as well as the addition of certain things like staff management, as well as aviaries and lagoons. So the staff management aspect is actually a big component of what makes this game better. In the previous game, the park was manned by unnamed individuals, you never saw them. Now you actually individually hire staff and assign them specific tasks, which then builds up their fatigue level. If you keep assigning them tasks too much without letting them rest, they'll resent you and become disgruntled, which leads to them sabotaging the park in the form of opening enclosure gates, initiating widespread blackouts, etc. The depth here is surprisingly engaging and well fleshed out. Each prospective staff member you hire has a starting salary, a hiring fee, and a somewhat random assortment of skill points in 3 specific categories of task speciality: logistics, genetics, and welfare. They also come with a specific trait. For example, one trait may be increases the unrest limit by 4, which makes them a great addition to your roster because they don't need to rest as often. Another could be reduces the cost of research tasks by 30%, which means that employee would be a great option when it comes to cheaply researching things in the lab. You know, like I said, it was surprisingly engaging trying to find the perfect combination of someone with good skill points and a compatible trait. Someone with a high level of logistics is a great pick, obviously, if they have a trait that makes excavating dinosaur fossils cheaper and quicker. This metagame of making sure your staff are the right picks for what you're doing adds a massive amount of depth to the minute-by-minute gameplay, and it's a super welcome addition. Speaking of minute-by-minute gameplay, one of the most annoying aspects of the first game was waiting around for things to happen. The over-reliance of timers and, boring mission objectives that demanded certain conditions be met, like securing or rampaging dinosaurs for X amount of time, meant there was a lot of downtime in between actually doing things. This game fixes a lot of those issues by simply adding a time speed option. Think like the time speed option in The Sims, for example. You can now pause and speed up the game, and it just makes the entire game so much more enjoyable. It's incredible that the first game didn't ship with it. Now, there's no more waiting around forever for a timer to tick down to 0 seconds. I mean, there still is technically, but you're usually either way more engaged in the gameplay options that you don't notice, or you can speed up time so much that it goes by far quicker anyway. Another beneficial change is the change to dinosaur behavior tracking. Now you can track a dinosaur's territory by placing a ranger's outpost within their enclosure and assigning a ranger team to it. If the dinosaur needs a certain type of foliage, or the size of the enclosure isn't up to snuff, or its social requirements aren't being met correctly and it's not comfortable, you're now more easily able to track that in real time and then adjust it very quickly to see those immediate changes reflected in the UI. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of making sure the dinosaurs are comfortable, which is super useful if you want to avoid uncomfortable dinosaurs breaking out and eating guests. Another big thing is genetic modification, and that plays a big role in the entirety of the Jurassic Park franchise, and it plays a big role in this game in terms of managing the dinosaurs themselves. It seems to be roughly the same as the first game, but with the added change that genetically modifying your dinosaurs can now increase the chances of them getting either negative or positive trait during the synthesis stage of their creation. I actually really like this system in this game, since it feels like a gamble. Do you want to spend your genetic modification points on your dinosaur increasing its lifespan so it lives longer, or is it better spent reducing its risk of being hyper aggressive so maybe you don't have to deal with it biting everything in its enclosure? Doing this all brings potential consequences though. You can choose to either bite the bullet and release your dinosaur with those negative traits that it has, or you can choose to completely scrap their genome and choose not to incubate the eggs further. But this will cost you the lost money obviously that you spent to synthesize that genome in the first place, and now you've got no dinosaur to show for it. And doing this can be extremely game changing because creating dinosaurs isn't cheap. For example, a Spinosaurus can cost upwards of $2 million. So, it's something that you have to weigh. It's an intricate system with a lot of risks and rewards, which makes it fantastically fun when you pull off a batch of eggs with all positive traits. As a quick aside, hatcheries themselves have now also been reworked so that you're able to release more than one dinosaur at a time, or you can airlift them from the hatchery directly into a new enclosure. And man, what a game changer that is. I've wanted it so bad since the first game, so it's incredibly nice to see it in this game. Because back in the first game, you had to have like these giant hatchery buildings attached to every single enclosure if you wanted to, easily put the dinosaurs in there from the hatchery. It just ended up taking up so much space in Jurassic World Evolution 1, and it's just a much needed improvement here in Jurassic World Evolution 2, and a great quality of life improvement. Dinosaurs can now also be injured, and they can also contract different diseases like salmonella and rabies, which then require you to send a mobile veterinary unit out to diagnose the dinosaur and then medicate them. Some injuries are so severe though that the dinosaur will require to be tranquilized from a helicopter and then transported to the veterinary building, where you can then assign a staff member to treat and cure them. This was a fine addition to the game, but I did find myself getting somewhat tired of engaging with it fairly quickly. It doesn't necessarily feel as engaging as any of the other new systems, and it more or less does chalk up to feeling like busy work for the sake of busy work. It didn't really feel like I was managing anything, or it didn't foster any kind of connection between me and the dinosaur. It honestly, more often than not, led me to being pretty frustrated that I had to stop what I was doing to set up a tranquilization and transportation routine, and then I'd have to try to not forget to transport the dinosaur back from the medication facility back into its enclosure after its treatment. I would often forget about that actually, and then the dinosaur would be sedated in that facility just for minutes on end. I would have liked to have seen it crop up slightly less during gameplay, or perhaps have it include less key clicks and more automation like the Rangers do, but it's in there and it's fine, I guess. One of the major changes I actually noticed from my 30 hours with the game is that guests in general have changed fairly significantly this time around as well. They now fit into 4 categories that are attracted to different elements of your park, which plays a big part in actually how you monetize your ventures. General guests are attracted to parks with large dinosaur counts and viewing galleries, but then you can invest more into subcategories of guests, such as adventure guests, nature guests, or luxury guests. Adventure guests want to see dinosaurs with lots of fight experience, or they want to see a dinosaur tour where they can get up close and personal. Nature guests want you to maximize dinosaur comfort, and they want large viewing platforms to see the dinosaurs in their natural habitats. And then there's luxury guests who want nice hotels to stay at, close to the enclosures, and they want to see a lot of different dinosaurs in general. Like, they emphasize dinosaur variety instead of just the raw count of dinosaurs. So they're not going to be happy if you've got like 60 Struthiomimus in the park, for example. Again, this sequel seems to be all about adding depth to existing game systems, and this achieves exactly that. Now planning your park and what you sell at your amenities plays a big part in how much you actually earn from your guests. You don't want to sell items at your restaurants that are geared towards nature guests if you have a primarily luxury-based audience showing up. They just won't be as likely to spend money. The management aspect here is really fantastic, like actually really engaging, and it's aided by a great set of visual tools that make it so much easier to pick out which parts of your park could use more guest amenities or ways for guests to view the dinosaurs. So, like I previously said, the amenities themselves can be adjusted to provide either food, drinks, or shopping to your guests, and within those three categories lie a bunch of subcategories that are then geared towards different types of guests. If I were to make my restaurant a teppanyaki place, adventure guests would immediately flock to it and spend their money there. I could then add interior modules into that building to further increase the amount of money those guests would then spend. Adding a dance machine, for example, would make those adventure guests more happy, and in turn they'd give me more cash because of that. It's all about that minute level of micromanagement that makes this game feel just a whole lot more cohesive and alive than the previous game, and it makes the game overall feel like it's earned the genre that it set out to be initially, that management tycoon style game. But like most things in the Jurassic Park franchise, it's not without its flaws. Everything I've said previously, for the most part, has been fantastic additions to the game, but there are still large flaws in the system here that stop Jurassic World Evolution 2 from being a truly great game. Like I said previously when I was talking about the vet management system, there's still too much tedious, unengaging gameplay present in some areas. It's not difficult or thoughtful gameplay when it consists of just clicking on a dinosaur and waiting for it to be sedated, to click on it again and move it to a vet clinic so you can wait again for it to be cured, so you can then click on it one final time to transport it back to the enclosure. It ends up feeling like a meaningless distraction from the things you actually want to be doing, and I don't think that's a very compelling feeling. This isn't helped by the dinosaur behavior system itself being somewhat inconsistent and chaotic, potentially by design. For example, I had a Proceratosaurus enclosure that I stocked with 4 Proceratosaurs. I did this because the minimum amount they required in the pen was 2 or 3 to be comfortable, since they're a pack creature. 4 was still in their comfortable population size, so I thought I was fine. They didn't have any negative traits that made them more antisocial, which I know is a possibility, but regardless, they would not stop fighting, which meant every 2 or 3 minutes there would be an injured Proceratosaurus in my enclosure requiring a visit to the vets, which would then drag me away from what I was doing to heal him and afterwards send him back into the Thunderdome. It got to the point where I was sending back the injured Proceratosaurus into its enclosure while its opponents were already waiting as he descended from the sky ready to tear into him. My solution eventually, after I got tired of playing their game, was to just trank all of them and sell them off and stock the pen with a completely different animal, which I assume is not the best solution, but I literally could not bother engaging with that veterinary mechanic that often. It's tedious and it harkens back to the first game's design of waiting around. And I do think that the dinosaur behavior systems need to be looked at again and fine-tuned so that it's not so irritating to work around. I also think the dinosaur fighting system itself needs to be tuned and changed from what it currently is. With the introduction of pack hunting, smaller theropods can hunt down pretty much anything, including sauropods, which makes just co-housing species an absolute nightmare. And the fighting system in general between dinosaurs still feels a bit odd and not dynamic enough for my taste. I think some more thought needs to be put into these systems, and I'd really like to see that happen eventually. Another frequent annoyance still present in the game is the terrain limitations and building placement issues. There were just many times during the game where it was incredibly annoying trying to place a building for what seemed like no reason at all. When the map size and gameplay require certain buildings to be placed in certain places to maximize profit, this is a system that is just not fun to engage with when it's being temperamental. A lot of the times I would have to reshuffle and reorganize entire segments of my park just to fit in an extra emergency shelter, for example, or a restaurant maybe, that wouldn't play nice with the boundaries of other buildings. It definitely doesn't feel perfect, and it definitely adds a whole lot of frustration to each gameplay session that I don't think is intended. And so now let's talk about the biggest change to the game, at least the biggest change that was shown in all of the marketing material leading up to launch. And that's the Lagoons and Aviaries. So yeah, first things first, it's really cool to see, pteranodons and other flying reptiles as well as marine dinosaurs in the game finally. This was something that people had wanted since before Jurassic World Evolution 1, and people were very disappointed not to see it in the first game. So it is really good to see it here finally. But the implementation still really does leave a lot to be desired. They're just extremely bland and forgettable. The dinosaurs themselves are good, but there's hardly any additional management or thought behind them other than being a new type of enclosure. With aviaries, you're at least able to edit the terrain inside like how you would with regular dinosaurs, but the lagoons really get no kind of customization or tweaking at all. You just place the lagoons and house them with species, and then it's done. What happens is, it leads to these buildings or these enclosures feeling the exact same every single time you build them. so they're not exactly exciting to play with after you first put them down. And that feeling persists across different maps and saves, so like once you first place down an aviary on the first map, it's fundamentally going to be the same in the next map and the next map, apart from general layout. And that goes double for the lagoons. So yeah, I really would have loved to have seen this more fleshed out, especially as it was one of the features fans had been wanting for forever. I also would have loved to have seen far more attractions in the game in general, other than what we currently received. I don't think there was a single new park attraction in the game, if I'm remembering correctly. You know, boat rides, viewing domes, helicopter tours, theme park rides. These would have been fantastic options, but regardless, I definitely feel like we needed more attraction options than what we currently have, just for the sake of variety, if not anything else. Another thing that feels somewhat bland in this game are the storms. They're still present in the game, and they're pretty much mostly the same as the first game. They cause various dangers to happen, but you know, at the end of the day, I don't think they were very mechanically different from what we had in the first game, and they weren't something that I was necessarily excited to engage with in the game. If a hurricane showed up, you'd put the park in emergency shutdown mode, you'd let all the guests shuffle into the emergency shelter, and then you'd just spend time repairing the damage before reopening. And it was pretty much the same for all of the other disasters. I didn't have an issue with them from a design or gameplay standpoint, and it is nice to see the new blizzard storm in the game, which does at least have a visual impact on your park, like it covers it in snow, and that looks pretty nice. But basically the storms are in the game still, and they're pretty much the same, and I don't have anything negative or positive to say about them really. They kind of spice up the gameplay every now and then, but they're not particularly engaging. All in all, there's a lot to like about the gameplay this time around. I think a lot of the changes contribute to a fresher feeling game with more depth, but there's still key aspects of the game that need a lot more work in order for everything to flow as well as it should. Luckily, one aspect of the game that is not lacking is the sheer variety of things on offer, which brings me to the game modes. So the game features 4 distinct separate modes: Campaign, Chaos Theory, Challenge, and Sandbox. Campaign is basically a tutorial mode set across a few different American locations. Mission by mission, it introduces new elements and dinosaurs and tasks you with very basic objectives. One mission had me photographing dinosaurs, and another had me tracking down an Allosaurus across the snowy Canadian mountains. They're very niche objectives that set apart each mission ever so slightly, but the core of the gameplay is about housing these dinosaurs in enclosures and making sure they're comfortable for a certain amount of time. Like I said, it's a tutorial mode pretty much, and the duration is short, and it doesn't overstay its welcome at all. You're looking at about 3 hours to complete this campaign, but you know, trust me, that's really not a bad thing at all. Each mission's bespoke objectives and beautiful varied locations set them apart from one another, but there's nothing mechanically in here that would have required a full 8-hour long campaign, and I'd wager it would have far outstayed its welcome if that were the case. In fact, that was the case of the original game's campaign, Jurassic World Evolution. It was a long slog that replayed the same mechanics over and over again, and it did very little to make the experience feel fresh, making the campaign instead be an introduction to the mechanics and world as a quasi-tutorial. I think was the right move here, as a way to educate the player for the more mechanically involved other modes. Speaking of meaty other modes, Chaos Theory. So what we have here is the more traditional campaign, I would say, composed of 5 distinct missions set in the what-if style premise of each of the franchise's specific movies. For example, have you ever wanted to take a crack at John Hammond's dream and vision of opening Jurassic Park for the first time? You can here. Each and every movie is represented here in some capacity, with Jurassic Park The Lost World tasking with opening Jurassic Park San Diego with the iconic amphitheater, and Jurassic Park 3 has you visiting Isla Sorna to package the dinosaurs still on the island after the events of the 3rd movie. And then you ship them off to Jurassic World, where they'll, eventually get to know Chris Pratt or whatever. They're great missions, filled with various objectives and interesting gameplay twists that kept me engaged and interested. To complete each of the missions would take you around 2 to 4 hours each, roughly, with the ones involving actually running a park. That's Jurassic Park 1, Jurassic Park 2, and Jurassic World. Those ones take slightly longer due to the fact that you're aiming to get 5 stars in them, which can be pretty time consuming. Regardless, it's a meaty mode and definitely the star of the Jurassic World Evolution 2 package. It's a really neat look back at Jurassic Park and world history with a lot of callbacks to be found. For example, in the Jurassic Park Chaos Theory mode, you're restricted to using only the original dinosaurs that were described either in the book or the movie, with 1 or 2 outliers here and there I think. But still, this is a genius limitation that adds strategic complexity to the gameplay loop, while also acting as a strong narrative callback to what it's referencing. Another big note is the buildings you place in the Jurassic Park 1 and 2 Chaos Theory modes are also all accurately modelled after buildings in the original movie aesthetic, so you can avoid the somewhat bland Jurassic World models as well. These building palettes are also an option in the Sandbox mode, which is perfect. It was a really fun and rewarding feeling opening up my own version of Jurassic Park, with the iconic Jeep tour zigzagging its way through my expertly designed enclosures filled with some of the most iconic Jurassic Park dinosaurs. I'm talking T-Rexes, Velociraptors, Brachiosaurus, all of those iconic dinosaurs that you saw in the first movie. It's a feeling I've wanted since the original Jurassic Park Operation Genesis days, and it's just so nice to finally get that. Just a really cool mode with a lot of different content. Then we have Challenge Mode, another fantastic addition that tasks you with earning 5 stars however you want on 5 different gorgeous maps. There's nothing narrative based here, you just do whatever you want with some limitations placed on you with the goal of earning as much money as you can from your attractions to maximize your guest appeal. Each map has different difficulties you can play them on, which further increases the varied restrictions placed on you. For example, playing the Canada map on easy makes staff salaries an easier burden to handle, you don't have to pay as much to the staff, whereas playing on the Jurassic difficulty makes it something you have to actively consider when planning your monthly income. Another example is the Germany map. Playing on easy allows you to use carnivore species and genetic modification in your park. Both are essential tools to easily increase your park rating. But cranking that difficulty up locks carnivores and genetic modifications away, making the game far more difficult. It's a great set of difficulty options, though I do feel a little bit let down by the rewards you're given for completing the challenges. You're currently given dinosaur cosmetic skins, which are essentially just new patterns and colors that you can apply to your dinosaurs when you're creating them. You get those for completing the challenges. These unlock when you first beat the challenge, or if you beat the challenges on medium and hard settings. There are currently no rewards, as far as I know, for beating the challenges on Jurassic difficulty or for beating the challenges in under par time. The dinosaur cosmetic skins are a great reward for those lower difficulty completions, that's not where my problem lies. But I'd love to see something special added for part-time Jurassic difficulty completions because they're the hardest content in the game. So it just feels a little bit weird when you're not given rewards for them. Regardless, Challenge Mode is a very fun and engaging mode as well, and it's the mode I think will get you the most playtime. The maps are varied, spread across different biomes, which change up the gameplay even more. The Canada map is a medium-sized map that is hit by a blizzard every now and then, creating a thick blanket of snow across the map. The Southwest US map is set in the arid desert with strong terrain limitations, also creating more gameplay concessions you have to strategize around. The point is though, it's a fun game mode to test yourself within, but I do hope future additions to Challenge Mode get better rewards to make it a more worthwhile. And finally, we have Sandbox Mode. Throughout all of the other Jurassic World Evolution game modes, you'll be unlocking new dinosaurs, genetic modifications, and buildings. When you first hatch a Triceratops, for example, you'll be able to then use Triceratops in Sandbox Mode. It's a great sense of progression. It means that when a new thing is used or unlocked for the first time in the other game modes, it's now added to your tool belt for Sandbox Mode. It's a really fun idea, and it makes unlocking those dinosaurs in the other game modes really rewarding because then you get to use them in your own sandbox. The Sandbox Mode itself is pretty straightforward though. It's a list of maps with a whole lot of options and toggles that change the objective of the mode. You can toggle Creative Mode on, which lets you just go wild with whatever you've unlocked so far, and there are very few limitations. This is what I would choose if I was just aiming to build a park for aesthetic reasons and if I wanted to strip away all of the management aspects of the game. There's a Standard Mode, which is basically just Challenge Mode, but on any map without the limitations and additional challenges that come with Challenge Mode. But you're also able to play Chaos Theory maps provided you've unlocked them, which is really fantastic. Finally, there's a Custom Mode where you're able to tweak all of the settings you could possibly want. Some of the options are things like turning off dinosaur starvation, or turning off dinosaur diseases, or turning on invincible vehicles. You can increase the chance of storms happening or sabotage occurring. There's a lot of options, and it does the job that I think it would need to do to create a compelling endgame for after you've completed everything else. One thing I did notice though is that it lacked the campaign maps, so that would be a fantastic option of including the campaign maps in the Sandbox Mode in the future, but they do not seem to be there at launch, and it's a shame because some of the campaign maps are really gorgeous as well. Alrighty, so now let's talk about the stars of the show, and yeah, this game looks beautiful. It's not a technical masterpiece or anything extremely next gen, but the studio has done a remarkable job at adding more variety and detail to the landscapes and dinosaurs. I was mostly surprised actually about the former, to be honest, and it's not something I thought I'd appreciate, but it's extremely nice to get more environments other than the tropical rainforests that made up the entirety of the first game. There's snow-capped mountains, arid deserts, and autumn-leafed plains, and all of these all add a variety to the places you can now build your park in, and they all just look absolutely wonderful. It's actually one of the strongest points of this game, is just the environments you're able to build in. As for the dinosaurs, yeah. These have to be the best looking dinosaurs in any video game so far. From the texture work to the animations, they're just so fun to sit back and watch. And there is over, I think at launch, over 80 of them. I've only unlocked half of them so far and I've put 30 hours into it. But yeah, they're fantastic. I would love to see more social interactions and varied animations for each dinosaur, because currently there's a few, but they do tend to replay a lot, so you're seeing the same social interaction quite a bit. But that doesn't change the fact that they're beautiful animations and they're extremely well done. The existing animations in the game currently are all beautiful and a large step up from the first game, which already did a pretty good job in that department. Again, it's not necessarily next gen or anything insane, but there's still the reason you'll be playing this game. Watching a herd of Parasaurolophus commingle with a Triceratops herd at a lake in front of a sunset is stunning, and so is watching a Velociraptor pack hunt down that same herd eventually. There's just so many varied encounters in here with the dinosaurs that it's all very enjoyable to watch. There feels to be more life to the dinosaurs in this game, and they react and move around somewhat more realistically. One thing that I could see being worked on in the future is that sometimes when the animals are moving, there's a little bit of jankiness to it, like they don't seem to correctly line up with where the animals are going, so there's a bit of jankiness there, but I assume that can be fixed eventually. The buildings all look great, and I really appreciate the added customization options for each guest amenity. You're able to change the facade quite a bit this time around, which is definitely a nice compromise for those that wanted Planet Coaster tier park customization. But I still would have liked to have seen far more options than what is currently in the game, especially in terms of things like park foliage, decorations, rocks, and especially the attraction customization itself. Another thing to note is the great sound design. Each dinosaur has different vocalizations, and you've got the iconic noises you're used to. If you've ever seen a T-Rex on the big screen before, you know the iconic roar. That's all here, and it all sounds great. The voice acting this time around feels a lot stronger, and it's definitely a lot less cheesy. I think praise deserves to go to both the dialogue writing and voice direction this time around, as it didn't feel as forced or arbitrary as the first game. Performance-wise, the game runs fine on PC. I was running at 4K high settings and getting around 70 FPS without DLSS on an RTX 2080 Ti. I have no real complaints about the performance, but I didn't test the game on console, so your mileage may vary there. I'd check out Digital Foundry's eventual review if they do one to get exact numbers for console. A thing I did notice during the game, sadly, were the bugs. There were several times throughout the game where things didn't react the way I anticipated, or visual glitches and hiccups persisted. Particularly trying to automate ranges was inconsistent and sometimes didn't feel to be working successfully or correctly. There was one time where I was desperately trying to tranquilize a dying Dimorphodon in an aviary, but the medical team and ranger team were both stuck in the doors of the hatchery and nothing would happen. So eventually the ranger team helicopter who was sent there to tranquilize the Dimorphodon got so confused that they just decided to leave the planet, like they just flew up into the atmosphere and left. So yeah, sadly that Dimorphodon didn't survive. And like I said previously, there were a few visual glitches here and there with dinosaur animations running weirdly. There were also floating fish haunting my park for some reason. These are fairly typical and nothing completely game breaking. I assume a lot of these will be patched over time since they don't seem like massive issues. The game runs fine though, and I didn't have any serious issues apart from I think 3 crashes over my 30 hours of game time, though I imagine that has more to do with my gameplay recording suite, because nearly all of those crashes happened when I was trying to start a recording for gameplay footage. However, there was one annoying graphical hiccup that I noticed throughout the majority of my gameplay, and that was a reoccurring blurring on moving items, and this happened during 70% of the game. It looked like Vaseline was smeared across the objects and it would just mirror endlessly until I moved the camera and it would kind of reset, but that wouldn't stay away for too long and then it would happen again. You can notice it most heavily when you're trying to place paths or when moving objects, or on the Ranger Team helicopter blades when they're spinning. It'll actually blur quite a bit then. Initially I tried troubleshooting it by turning off DLSS, as I thought it was, potentially an imagery creation issue, but that didn't seem to fix it, so I'm not really sure what the issue is there, if it's on my end or if it's on the game's end, but I thought I'd mention it here anyway and show footage of it. Regardless, it was just an annoying thing that happened to me for the majority of the game, so I wanted to mention it. Alright, so all in all, I really enjoyed my time with Jurassic World Evolution 2. I know it sounds like I was nitpicking quite a bit and I had a lot of complaints, but I really did enjoy Jurassic World Evolution 2. Now, I'm not quite so sure if that's because Jurassic World Evolution 1 set the bar so low for me, or because the changes made to the sequel actually did contribute to a much more fun and more engaging experience. But you know what? I'm willing to say it was the latter, because the changes do genuinely feel great for the most part. So, would I recommend this game currently? Yeah, I think I would. I did enjoy the game, and I think my enjoyment doesn't even stem from the fact that I love dinosaurs. In fact, it's probably made me more critical, if anything. If you're a management game fan, or if you like the franchise or dinosaurs in general, I'm sure there is a lot of fun to be had here, because I had fun. It's not without its flaws, and it's not even what I would describe as a great game, but it's a fairly unique game with very strong set dressing that has moments of genuine greatness. I wouldn't recommend this to if you didn't enjoy the first game for reasons other than its lack of depth. If you found you just didn't like the type of game the first one was, this isn't going to change that for you, so don't go in expecting a miracle. If you're into arbitrary ratings, I'd give the game a 7.5 out of 10, a 3.5 out of 5, or a 75 out of 100. And for context, I'd give the first game around a 5 out of 10, a 2.5 out of 5, or a 50 out of 100. Anyway, that's it for me this time. Community interaction time right now. Let me know what your favorite dinosaur is below. I'll heart anyone who has the same favorite as me, and I'll even give you a hint. It's a sauropod. So if you know any big juicy sauropods that you think I'd like, drop those below and I'll heart whoever knows me the best. Feel free to like and subscribe for more videos coming up, and I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you guys next time.